What we have here is a very special contraption. This is a pump that's trying its best right now to pump water from our little reservoir down here into the entire contraption that is our groundwater model. And this is a really cool system that shows just how water flows beneath our feet. And there's all kinds of really cool things that we're going to learn today and see, but I just wanted to show you how it starts filling up. And it's pretty fun to watch it. See our different levels starting to fill up. So we like to think of this as our watershed, and in our case that's the River Raisin watershed. The River Raisin watershed starts in this example right here. We call that the headwaters of our river, and in our case this is near Brooklyn, which is the actual headwaters is near the Onstead State Game area, right next to the Michigan International Speedway. So if you've ever been in that area, that's where our river starts. And then in our example here, the river will keep on flowing downstream. We might pass through Onstead, we might pass through Tecumseh, we might pass through Dundee, and we might pass through Adrian, we might pass through Petersburg and get all the way down to Monroe. And Monroe is the place where our river ends. It flows into one of our Great Lakes called Lake Erie. So if you've never been there, you can visit the end of the River Raisin near Sterling State Park. So in our example today, we're going to pretend this is our River Raisin, and we're going to focus more on the underground parts. So today we're going to be investigating basically everything you see that's around the state of Michigan. Fresh water. We're going to talk about how it moves above and below ground. We're going to be using our special groundwater model, which you can hear in the background. Sounds like running water. We're going to talk about what we do on our land that affects the health of our water, and then we're going to talk a little bit more about what we can do to keep that water clean. Does anybody know what a watershed is? Have you even heard that word before? Well, if you don't know what it is, a watershed is an area of land where all the water in that area drains. So anywhere you go, whether it's in Michigan or in the US or another country, you're in a watershed. And if you still can't really picture it, I like to think of a watershed as a bowl. And when water falls from the sky, whether it's rain or snow, that water is falling on the rim of the bowl and in the other low parts, but it falls into the rim on the higher part of that bowl. And in real life, that's higher elevation, like a hilltop or a mountaintop. And that water runs downhill, right? That's how gravity works. So as that water is running downhill after it falls from the sky, it meets up with more water and it forms little streams. And those little streams make bigger and bigger streams until they reach a large river. And those little streams, we like to call them tributaries. Now, I'll give you an example of a tributary in our watershed. If you live in Tecumseh and you live near Evans Creek, or if you're going to high school or school near Evans Creek, that is a tributary to the River Raisin. We have a bunch of tributaries in our watershed that go right into our River Raisin. And then that River Raisin, or anywhere in the watershed in the world, that river will go into an ocean or a lake or a bay or somewhere that has a bigger amount of water. So in our case, our River Raisin goes into Lake Erie. And it's a really cool thing that we live in a Great Lakes watershed. Watersheds have different sizes, and our watershed is it's just over 1,000 square miles. And to put that into perspective, that's about the size of Rhode Island, surprisingly. So while our watershed sounds like it's pretty big, compared to some of the other watersheds in Michigan, it can be pretty small. You'll see on the map I'm going to throw up here, the Saginaw River, the Kalamazoo River, the Grand River, those are all big watersheds. That just means that all that water within that land area is flowing down and eventually running into the same river, whether that's the River Raisin, the Grand River, whatever. So back to our River Raisin watershed, most of the land is used by farming. So about over 60% of the land in the River Raisin watershed is agricultural land. So back to the River Raisin and the water itself. The River Raisin is about 140 miles long, so it's a lot of water in there. Now, where do you think all that water comes from? Take a minute to pause and think about where all that water might come from. And if you need a hint, there's a certain cycle in nature that water comes from. Maybe I gave too much away there. This is called the water cycle. And the water cycle is a never-ending cycle. As you can see, rain falls from the clouds. We call that precipitation. And then it falls into any kind of different situation. It can fall on the land, and if that land is developed and has like cement or asphalt, it can't infiltrate into the ground. So it has to run off somewhere, and that could be into a drainage ditch, a pond, another river or lake. So that's one option for that water, right? It can run off the land. The second option could be that water falls into a river or a lake or stream and just builds up the amount of water that's in there. The third option could be that water infiltrates into the ground and becomes groundwater. And that's what the main topic of today is going to be. So definitely take a good hard look at our water cycle, because that's very important to see how it continues cycling. Now, if it has a break in the cycle, what do you think might happen? And what do you think might have caused that break? Take a pause to think about that. If you said maybe there's less water because of a drought, or people are using too much water, that could be why the water cycle isn't going as fast as maybe we'd like it to. So this is often plays out in the West Coast, like in California, where they have a lot of droughts and they have special restrictions on what people can do with their water. Sometimes people can't wash their cars during the day, they have to wait till nighttime. Let's talk a little bit more about this groundwater stuff. So it's hard to see it because the water is clear, but water is flowing through all this sediment underground, and it's flowing from high elevation up here down, down, down to low elevation over here, just like we see in watersheds when rivers are formed. So there's a lot of really important stuff that's always going on beneath our feet. Groundwater, when it infiltrates the soil and goes down deeper into the ground, it's actually cleaned by soil particles and by special plants that are along the surface of the water or above ground. So plants and soil have the ability to remove different kinds of pollutants and contaminants from our water. So typically, when we have groundwater, it's usually cleaner than the water that is in our rivers or lakes which is what we call surface water. And that's because those soils and plants are able to clean out some of those contaminants. So a lot of our towns and cities get our water from the ground. And if you don't live in a city or a town, you might have a well. Either way, you're most likely getting some kind of groundwater for drinking or for washing your clothes or cooking with or taking a shower or flushing your toilet with. So wells provide water for us for all different kinds of uses. And let me give you a little shot of what a well might look like. So it's underground and it goes through all different kinds of soil surfaces or different soils. So there's some chunky sand up here, there might be some finer sand down here, and this is actually a layer of clay. Now, the size of soil particles really makes a difference in how our water moves. Think about this. If you ever have gone to a beach and you feel the sand, you can feel those individual granules or grains of sand. That means the particles are pretty big. But when you feel clay that's really kind of slimy and smooth, that means those particles are very small. So if we think about water going through sand versus clay, the water has a lot more space to get through those particles in sand versus clay, because the clay particles are so close together. So this well goes down below the sand, down below this clay layer, and into some more sand. And it goes into a place called an aquifer. This is basically what you can think of as an underground lake. And because it's in between a layer of clay and the bedrock, we call it confined. It's just between kind of harder to penetrate water areas. So it's a confined aquifer. So what I'm going to do is take some water from our well here through my pump, right? Because we need pumps to get water up from the well. And I'm going to pump it out. So let's see if our pump works. Alright, looks like we got some water in our pump, and I can put this right into my drinking glass, right? Because I have delicious fresh groundwater. Now, of course, groundwater has to be treated, it has to be treated in order to drink it and to use it. So we'll just keep that in mind. But that's pretty much how our wells work. We get it from the ground through a well like this, and a pump takes it up out of the ground and into our homes. So remember how I said that most groundwater is a lot cleaner than our surface water from lakes or streams? Well, that's not always the case. And the reason that is because sometimes people either accidentally or just kind of unknowingly contaminate the groundwater. How do you think people would contaminate the groundwater? Take a pause and find an answer. And if you had a guess, that was we might dump some things down our old wells or different places in our home, like our drains. That is one way that our groundwater can get contaminated. So let's just take an example here. We have, let's pretend this is an old well. And some people have done this before where they have, let's pretend this is old motor oil. And I'm gonna just dump it down the well. Maybe I don't know that it's an old well, or, you know, some people say out of sight, out of mind. But that oil is not gonna stay where it was dumped. Where do you think this is going? Because remember, groundwater is always moving. It might be moving very slowly compared to our rivers above ground, but it's always moving. So this cloud of contamination seems to be going with the flow of the water in our confined aquifer. Now, if we take a look downstream or down underground, what do you think might happen if someone who lives and uses their water from some of these wells is gonna do? What might happen to their water? Well, whatever was dumped down this well might end up getting into their water supply, right? And it might be pumped up into their house. They might drink it, they might shower in it, they might cook with it. And sometimes this contamination is hard to detect. It might smell funny, it might look funny, or it might not show up at all. So it's always important if you have groundwater to test it, or if you get your water from a well to test it every year to make sure that it's safe and there's no contamination in it. And this is water that you get from the city or town is always tested to be sure there's no contamination in your water. So let's see, look how far this has gone. It went from this area all the way across, and look at that. That would definitely go up this person's well and into their water supply, and then into this well and into their water supply. So man, this has traveled all the way down our watershed. So things that you do upstream, like in here, can affect people all the way downstream. Does anybody know what a septic system is? If you don't, I'll put a picture up so you can get a better visual of it. But basically, these are common for people that live outside of cities. So if you're in the country or in a rural area, you have a septic tank, and this is something that's underground that connects to your house. And anytime you flush the toilet or have water go down the drain, whether that's in a sink or shower, that water with everything in it goes down through pipes and goes into a storage box underground. And in that box there are bacteria and things that break down waste, stuff you might grind up in the sink or that you flush down the toilet, and that stays at the bottom of the tank. It has to be cleaned out every so often, but it stays at the bottom, and then all the water, like from the sink or from the shower, goes on top of it. And then that water goes out in these forks underground in your yard, where the water then trickles down and is cleaned by the soil and plants around it. So that's what a working septic tank does. It keeps all the bad contaminants that contain harmful bacteria and nutrients, and it keeps it in this box. And then the rest of what we call gray water, which has less contamination, it goes and filters through the soil and is cleaned that way. But sometimes we don't pay attention to our septic tanks because they're underground. What we say, out of sight, out of mind, right? So if we haven't had our inspection on our septic tank, it might not be working properly, and this is what can happen if our septic tanks are not working properly. So you can see our contamination is, what is it doing? Well, it's not staying in one area, that's for sure. See, it's moving through the ground, and it's moving somewhat slowly, but surely, right? And where do you think this might go? Well, there's a lake right next to this, right? And some lakes are groundwater fed. That means water comes into the lake through groundwater springs. Not all lakes do this, but some do. So this could be a problem if it's groundwater fed, right? And can you see any other problems that might happen with this contamination from our septic tank going this way? Looks like it might hit somebody else's well, right? And it might hit a few other people's well, like this. And since this is a layer of clay, that water with the contamination will not be able to go through that. So the people with these wells might be safe from that contamination. So that is a big problem, and this is a problem common in Michigan, surprisingly. So if you want to help keep groundwater, the water that you might be drinking, safe, it's a good reminder to tell your parents, hey, have we had the septic tank checked lately? You're supposed to do it every 3 years. So we'll keep an eye on where this contamination is going. You might be wondering what this is for, UST. This stands for Underground Storage Tank. And as we're waiting for our leaky septic system, we're watching that. Looks like it has gone into well number 5 and 6, and it's still moving. Let's talk about underground storage tanks. In Michigan, there's quite a few. If you think about gas stations, you don't see the gas stored above ground. It's all stored below ground. And if those are leaky, that can lead to some pretty serious issues as well. Whatever is stored in those underground storage tanks could start to leak into our groundwater. And it looks like it's doing the same thing as our septic tank, right? Where it's slowly leaking out of that storage tank and flowing where the groundwater's flowing, which is downhill, right? So let's take a look at where our septic tank has leaked. Oh my, it looks like it has actually gone all the way through these different wells into our stream. And in this example, remember we called this Monroe, and this is the end of the river, so this would actually be Lake Erie. So that would be septic waste all the way from here that's flowing all the way down in our watershed to Lake Erie. So this stuff can travel a really long way. And why do you think this would be bad if our septic systems were leaking and causing problems in getting into Lake Erie? Take a pause to think about why that might be an issue. In septic tanks, there's a lot of different contaminants, not to mention like E. coli, bacteria, things that are very unhealthy, but there's also nutrients. And nutrients, as you know, make plants grow. And in Lake Erie, this is a huge problem when there's too many nutrients getting into it because it causes algae to grow. And when it grows and grows and grows, we call that a bloom. You might have seen pictures of Lake Erie, all green, all covered in green. That's an algae bloom, and that can be very harmful for human health because some algae produces toxins, and if we drink that, we get sick. Same with our pets. If our pets drink it or get into it, it can cause them to be unhealthy or even die. So it also causes problems for fish, and when the algae stops blooming, they eat up all those nutrients, and then those algae begin to die, and that causes the lake to have lower oxygen levels. So it actually affects the fish in Lake Erie as well. So something as simple as making sure that our septic tanks and any underground storage tanks are not leaky can help prevent the amount of nutrients that could get into our waterways and into Lake Erie. So just a minute ago, we simulated somebody dumping contamination into this well, and all the way it went from this well down to some other people's wells, and it filtered out through the ground over there. But since nobody has been dumping any more contamination down that well, it seems like the water, since it's always flowing, has cleared itself out, right? And that's the beauty of groundwater, is that once the contamination is taken care of, when we're not contaminating an area anymore, it will eventually clean itself out. Now this could take a really long time because groundwater flows very slowly, but it's encouraging because it's still possible. Now we're going to visit our lake here. Some of us might be lucky enough to live next to a lake or a river, and we're going to pretend in this instance that we live right here. And this is our beautiful green lawn. And maybe you or your parents really love to have a bright green, short, beautifully manicured lawn. Well, in order to have such a green and beautiful lawn, what do you need to do to it? If you said mow it, you're correct. And if you said add fertilizer to it, that's also true. A lot of people add fertilizer to their lawns and their gardens to help the plants grow. But oftentimes, a lot of those people don't read the directions on fertilizer bags and actually end up applying more than they need. And this can be a problem. And we're going to see why this could be a problem with our little demonstration. So here we are, we're going to apply some fertilizer to our beautiful green lawn, and it is just getting gorgeously green, and maybe we applied more than we need, but hey, the more the merrier, right? Well, not really, because when we apply more than we need, the plants aren't able to use all of it, and it actually runs off our land. And the way that it runs off our land is through water. So let's say we apply all of this fertilizer on our land here, but then, it starts to rain. We didn't look at the forecast before we did this, so it is starting to rain, and our extra fertilizer we applied is now running off from our land here, and boom, into our lake. Look at that. Look how blue our lake is. So when this happens, we talked about nutrients getting into our lakes and rivers and how that can cause algae blooms. And this is another way that those extra nutrients get into our lakes and rivers, is by over-fertilizing our lawns, especially if we live right next to a lake or a river. Now, something that you can do to prevent more nutrients from getting into lakes and rivers is, one, to apply less fertilizer on your lawn and maybe relay that information to your parents. And then two is planting native plants instead of mowing your lawn right up to the edge of the lake there. And the reason that could be helpful in getting rid of those extra nutrients is if you have a lawn right here and then a bunch of native plants, those plants will catch those nutrients instead of going right into the lake there. So this is one way that you can help keep nutrients from getting into our lakes and rivers and keeping our water cleaner. Now you might be thinking, these are things that maybe my parents can take care of, but what's something that I can do that can keep our water cleaner? Well, one thing that you can do if you have a dog is pick up after it. Yep, that's right. Picking up your dog's poop can help make the water cleaner. Now, why do you think that would be? Take a pause and think about why picking up after our pets might keep our water cleaner. If you thought about it, you might have guessed that our dog's poop has nutrients in it. And those nutrients, when we'll do another example here. This is our yard, and if we have those dog poop that we're not picking up, or we're out for a walk and we didn't pick up after our dogs, that's going to stay on the landscape until a rain comes through and washes that dog poop into a lake or a river or even a storm drain. Storm drains are connected directly to rivers. There's no filtration. So storm drains also can be a way that nutrients get into our water. So picking up after our pets, taking the poop and picking it up in a bag and throwing it in the garbage is the best way to make sure the nutrients from our dog poop doesn't get into our lakes or rivers. And it's also really nice of you to pick up after your pets, because who wants to step in that, right? Now, I had mentioned earlier that our watershed is mostly made up of farmlands. So there's a lot of ways that farmers are getting into making sure our water is cleaner by planting things like buffer strips, which is basically a bunch of rows of native grasses or any kind of grass next to a ditch or a stream that's next to their crop fields. And those buffer strips catch the extra water running off from the fields that has all the nutrients from fertilizers or even pesticides. So if you live on a farm and you're interested in helping keep our water cleaner, you can visit our website or go to the Lenawee Conservation District or any conservation district that is in your area or county, and you can get help to be more to keep our rivers and water healthier if you live on a farm. In Michigan, we are spoiled rotten. Look at us surrounded by all of this fresh water. Can you name all the Great Lakes? Take a minute to pause and name all 5 of these Great Lakes. Let's go ahead and take a tour of them. We've got Lake Superior up here, which is bordering the UP. We've got Lake Michigan on the west side of Michigan. We've got Lake Huron on the east side of Michigan. And we've got Lake Erie, which is where our river flows into, right over here. And then we've got Lake Ontario. And all together, we can remember that by the acronym HOMES, right? So all of the water within our Great Lakes, there's a ton of it. Does anyone know how much water is in our Great Lakes? Go ahead and take a guess. If you guessed 6 quadrillion gallons, you are correct. That's 6 with 15 zeros behind it. Think about it. This is a gallon. 6 quadrillion of these, right? Crazy. There's so much water. And we're so lucky to be surrounded by all of it. But that means we have to be responsible, right? We have to make sure that we're keeping it clean and that we're preserving it, that we're not using too much of it. Because not only do other people rely on this fresh water to survive, but what else relies on water to survive? Take a pause, think about it. If you said everything, you'd be correct. Plants rely on clean water to survive, and so do animals. Animals like snakes, beavers, fish, frogs, salamanders, deer. Any kind of animal needs water to survive, and some of them even live in water. So making sure that we are taking care of our fresh water and our Great Lakes and our rivers is very important so that it can stay healthy for everyone and for all people to use it.